I'm Eric from Longbox Review.
I'm Peter from the Daily Rios, and this is episode 19 of Eric and Peter's Legion Project podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 19 of the Legion Project podcast. As I said, I am Peter.
And I am Element Lantern.
Oh, you did it.
I'm actually Eric, but, on occasion I'm known as Element Lantern. And Peter, what do you sometimes go by?
I guess I'll forever be known as Phantom Lad.
So I guess DC Comics a few days ago released this little thing, the first initial of your name is this, and then whatever month you were born is that, and then you get to choose your Legion name. So Peter and I did that.
Yours is at least cool.
Yeah. What, you don't like Phantom Lad?
Wasn't there a Phantom Lad in Mark
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, I think there wasn't there?
Yeah, or am I confusing him with Dream Lad or something like that?
Or Dream Lad. That would be better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of what is interesting is for people who don't know, I do theater, and I did a production of Hair, the Tribal Love musical. It was the last production I did before I went quote unquote professional, which really just meant I was no longer going to do theater for free. And because we belonged to a tribe, we were the cast itself tried to really get close together for that show and just become a unit or whatever. We gave each other tribe names, and you couldn't make up your own name. Someone had to make up the name for you.
Oh, this sounds very familiar.
Yeah, so someone nominated me, and they called me Smoke. And they sort of put it in about, like, if you see it, there's always something more to it, and sometimes you're wispy in how you present yourself to others. I don't know. It was this whole thing. So then when I got that whole Phantom Lad thing, I was like, it's like a theme.
Yeah, it's following you around.
I guess. And I guess all of that is in anticipation, as we record this episode, of the new Legion of Superheroes series that will be released in just a couple days, November 6th. Brian Michael Bendis, Ryan Sook, and company. A new Legion of Superheroes after... How long has it been since we've had a series?
Oh.
A couple years, right?
At least... Yeah, I don't remember how long ago it was. Because that was the New 52 series that ended, and we haven't gotten a Legion series since then, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and that didn't last very long, as I recall.
Yeah, and they had Legion Lost. They had two of them, right? Legion of Superheroes, Legion Lost. And then they all but vanished. Outside of... some Easter eggs here and there, and whatever's going on in Doomsday Clock, which I haven't read yet. We finally get it. We finally get a new volume of Legion of Superheroes.
So yeah, you mentioned Doomsday Clock, and I had the final issue is, I believe, out or will be out next week. I don't remember.
Will be out in December.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we don't know how it ends, but I talked to Peter about this over Twitter, but because Saturn Girl appeared in Doomsday Clock, and I don't know that we've talked about it on the show, Peter, but it made me reading Legion of Superheroes Millennium, and we'll talk about issue 2 later, but reading that first issue and then comparing that to what is in Doomsday Clock, I think that they had a plan that they totally changed because it's been so long since Doomsday Clock launched, and then Bendis came and is doing his thing with the Legion. So it's interesting what has occurred in issue number 11 of that series regarding Saturn Girl.
Yeah, it feels like a couple other places within the DC universe, things kind of not lining up, or it would have lined up had it finished earlier.
Right, exactly. Yeah, now I'm really curious if what they had planned was going to tie into or dovetail into what Bendis and company are doing, or if it was a totally different plan and then Bendis came in and upturned everything. I don't know. It's just one of those, what if type things.
Right.
If I can shout out a different company.
Or if, like the last issue, they kind of have to tweak it now because it is a little later, and whatever they're spinning off into 2020, is that really going to resonate from Doomsday Clock? And and it's not only the Legion, but it's the Justice Society, it's Luthor, it's Wally West, it's just Superman, it's a whole bunch of stuff.
Everything old is new again, Peter.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. As Eric said, we will be talking about Legion of Superheroes Millennium number 2 at the end of this episode. You can go to the timestamps if you want to cheat and listen ahead. We talked about issue 1 last episode. This will give us our thoughts on the quote-unquote prologue to the Legion of Superheroes series as the new series is released. So once we get our hands on a copy of Legion of Superheroes number 1, we will decide at that time if we're going to wrap it up into another episode just like this, or if we're going to record an episode like a standalone. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out once we figure out how much we need to talk about it.
That might be good because I'm thinking the timing will be next month. So it'll be December, it'll be end of the year, and sort of going to the whole new beginning, a new year and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the timing I think is kind of perfect, right? Considering where we're at in the calendar.
Yeah. And if you think about it in terms of our podcast or the Baxter Run started in 84, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 94 to 35 years, right?
Wow.
35 years after the Baxter Run, we get a new Legion series. Will it have the same resonance? Will we love it? Will we still want to cover it? You'll have to come back.
Yeah.
Later.
We are just full of anticipation.
Nice. All right. So before we jump in to, I lost my notes. Where are they? Where are my notes? Here they are. Okay. I'm recording on a new setup this time, listeners, so I'm all over the place. I wanted to give some shout outs to some people who have been so kind on Twitter, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some people. It's not meant to be definitive, but a bunch of people, whenever we drop a new episode, they like it or they retweet it, and that's awesome. Or they even recommend it to other people looking for new podcasts. So this is just a small sampling. The Earth's Mightiest Podcast crew, they cover the Avengers, the X-Universe, and Deadpool, Resurrections, and Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast. Charlton Hero over at the Superhero Satellite blog, who always sends us some emails every now and then. Dave's Comic Heroes blog, Daryl of the Taylor Network, and George and his co-hosts over at the Meanwhile at the podcast. And as I said, anybody else who really helped who is helping to spread the word. Many, many, many tips of the hat.
Yes, thank you very much.
How about we go into Legion of Superheroes, issue 19?
Yes, all right. Issue number 19, No Good Deed Goes Unpunished. This was written by Paul Levitz with Greg LaRocque and Larry Malstead as our artists. A new letterer this issue, Augustin Mas. Carl Gafford continues as our colorist with Karen Berger as editor. The cover is by LaRocque and Malstead. So what the heck happened this issue? Well, while helping the residents of Mana 5, I love that name, both Phantom Girl and Ultra Boy disappear in front of an astonished Colossal Boy, who then frantically calls Legion HQ and yells at the ever-increasingly dense Timberwolf to get him Element Lad, who then shows up doing a great Ford Prefect impersonation and then promptly fades out himself. We get an interlude with the Science Police as Chief Zendak rips the officers a new one about the recent insubordination seen in the previous issues. Afterward, Science Police Officer Gigi Cusimano maligns Legion Liaison Officer Siobhan Aaron. I hope that Peter and I talk about that, because considering how much Peter loves Gigi. Back at Legion HQ, the assembled team discusses the disappearance of the 5 members, including Chameleon Boy and Shrinking Violet, although we didn't see that. They don't get past one page of deliberations when the culprit makes himself known. It's a controller. It seems the Sun Eater the controller from issues 7 through 8 was building wasn't for death and destruction. Well, actually it was, but not for the reason assumed by the Legionnaires. In fact, its purpose was to destroy Warworld. I mean, Tiraz. We'll have to talk about that, Peter. A wandering death planet that the Legionnaires now have to figure out how to defeat. White Witch is conveniently, again, sidelined, and the Legion comrades cannot be found by Mon-El or Sensor Girl using their superpowers. So Mon-El, Wildfire, and Dawnstar head off Earth to look for them. Brainy be brainy as he contemplates yet again who is Sensor Girl. And finally, Tiraz attacks the abducted Legionnaires. Violet is injured. Phantom Girl saves her, and Ultra Boy saves both of them as they ask each other, how are 5 people supposed to stop a killer planet? Dun, dun, dun.
I think this is one of our first major callbacks to this volume, right? Story-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Normally we get stories that are touching on, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, or Legion of Superheroes, quote-unquote, Volume 1. But now we're actually getting ramifications of a story told just a year ago.
Yeah, and I love it because, as I recall, when we talked about issue 8 and what those 5 Legionnaires did in destroying that Sun Eater factory planet, I was like, what's going to be the ramifications of this action? And I was really concerned that it was just going to be this one-off little thing, and yet here it is, and they have to answer for their actions. I love that.
So what are your general thoughts for the issue then?
Well, that's basically it. I like that they did that. We get a resolution to that plot thread. The second story, we'll talk about that later. We get a resolution there too. So as I mentioned to Peter off mic, this issue is about tying up loose ends, and I really like that aspect of this particular issue. I really like how, it's maybe it seems kind of quaint or naive or whatever, but there's a scene with Element Lad towards the end of the issue where to me he's like the voice of reason, and he's like the Legion in microcosm. He refuses to break the Legion code despite the odds, and it's not like he's saving a bunch of people at the moment. He's not doing something really super heroic with his powers or whatever. He's just being a good person. And I for some reason, maybe it's the current political climate these days, but I like the fact that this character is doing what's right because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I like that ending scene with Element Lad. I'm sure we'll talk about that, especially in relation to the first time we came across this story.
Mm-hmm.
So my first read of this, it felt a little jarring. I don't know why. Maybe because that's the right emotion with all of these disappearances, and everybody's kind of confused and nobody knows what's going on. And but I also was wondering if it was like some kind of writer artist. They didn't feel connected for this issue, and then I read it a second time, and I kind of forgot all that because I was able to, especially because I knew by that when I read it again, I was like, well, okay, now I know what's going on. I've read this issue before. I mean, we're sort of coming up on issues that I really, really always remember. They're sort of ingrained in my head because I read them so much. So at first I was kind of like, okay, that was kind of felt like the first chapter 1. Felt like issue 7, like we talked about it, where it didn't feel like much happened. And then the second chapter ramped up. But on a second read, I was a little more forgiving with this issue. I talked again about, I like that this series now has history, especially now that we don't have the reprints anymore. We don't have the 2 books, Tales and Legion, going side by side. This is really the only book. So that's kind of fun that this series can now stand on its own. I guess maybe some of the reaction that I had was that this issue kind of felt very much by the book. Everything was right. Everything was kind of, the artwork was decent in a lot of places. The story aspect to it, there was a nice flow. There's 1 or 2 things. There's some discrepancies I need to point out, but it felt kind of like a done by the numbers kind of book. And I remember you talking about Paul Levitt saying, Greg LaRocque was what did he call him? Not a soldier, but he gave him a name where he was like, when he came on the book, he did what he had to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I felt like that's what this issue did. It did what it had to do. So I didn't love it, but I'm glad I read it a second time, and I think I even read it a third time once I was going through my notes. And I'm curious to see where Chapter 2 goes.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you talk about LaRocque as you did, because when I was reading this, I noticed, one, I had a complaint, I forget now if it was last episode or previous to that, but I had a complaint about how the art, LaRocque was basically depicting the male faces of the characters, and they all seem very, very similar. And I noticed in this issue that's changing. So he's starting to show some individuality a little bit more with the characters, which tells me he's maybe feeling a little more comfortable doing the job he's doing. And then we get a little bit of like that splash page with Ultra Boy there on page 1. I just thought that was a really cool depiction of the character, a little exaggerated, but that's fine. So I don't know. I felt like the art in here was starting to be a little more, as I said, he seems to be a little more comfortable in what he's doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a couple places that are really nice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And maybe that plays into what you're saying too, because he's feeling comfortable. Maybe he's. I love how we're speculating what happened in Greg LaRocque's mind 30 years ago, but maybe he's just like he's doing the job. He's doing it by the numbers, so to speak.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it keeps going. Hopefully, we had to give Lytle some room, and so I think we got to give LaRocque some room too. Yeah,
yeah, but it is very different though. And when Lytle came on, there was this, I don't know, the way I felt about it anyway. There was this energy to it, even if it wasn't as refined. It was the energy behind his work made up for that, and I've not felt that way about LaRocque at all.
So how about we go to the covers? We have the cover to this issue by LaRocque, and with Malstead. And then the Tales cover that was printed a year later, that one is by, what's the number on that? I didn't write that down.
344?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it's by Kevin Nolan.
By Kevin Nolan,
yeah, that was a surprise to me. I actually don't have this issue in my collection, so I had to look that up. But yeah, I was I was surprised to see Kevin Nolan on a Tales of the Legion book.
And he hasn't done much at all when it comes to the Legion. I looked it up, and so he did this cover, which, by the way, is probably his second work with DC at the time. He was doing stuff for Marvel and Independence, but this was early in his DC work. And then according to Comic Book DB, he would draw one other cover, which was issue number 38 of just the Legion title from 2004, which has a little bit of history because it's the last issue of the Archie reboot before they make way for the Mark Waid, Barry Kitson 3-boot. So it's interesting that the number 38 pops up a lot in Legion history. It's going to mean something to the Baxter series. It means a hell of a lot to the 5 years later. And it also means a little bit of something to that Legion series from 2002, 3, 4, or whatever it was.
Wow.
Yeah. So only 2 covers for Mr. Nolan, two Legion appearances. I don't think he's, again, according to Comic Book DB, he didn't do any interiors or anything. So it's kind of strange.
Yeah, it is.
So of the 2, do you have... I almost feel like it's unfair to compare them because they're so very different.
I do not like the Kevin Nolan cover.
Okay.
It's fine. It shows an action scene, but it's very much a scene in the book, just told or shown from a slightly different perspective. It's the art's not bad or anything. It's just that I like issue number 19's cover. It's got some menace. You got some perspective in there with the hand reaching out towards the characters and they're all reacting to it. I just think it's a lot more dynamic, even though the action shown in the, it's going to sound totally contradictory, but the action shown in the Tales cover, there is action. I mean, there's literally action going on. He's flying. He's being chased. The character's being chased. There's lasers all around. But I just find it kind of boring.
And really just not what we're used to.
Oh yeah, it's definitely different from what we've been seeing in the Tales covers. Well, I know the majority of those, or all, I can't remember now, were Lidl covers, weren't they?
No, I think there was like an Ordway one.
Okay.
Yeah. But the majority, yes. Yeah. Yeah, he has a sensibility, Nolan has a sensibility that it feels other.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It doesn't feel like Legion. Although it's interesting to see a different artist's take.
Oh, yeah.
But...
Because I love his Phantom Girl on that cover. I just something about. I mean, you barely see her face, but you get the pigtails, you get the flares of her sleeves and her pant legs. I love that depiction of her in this.
Yeah, she's adorable. That's my girl. That's why I'm Phantom Lad.
That's right.
But apparently we've had Jerry Ordway, we've had Paris Cullins, we've had Eduardo Barreto, we even had Ernie Colon do a cover on these Tales issues. But this one, for some reason, I wrote it feels just other. So it's sort of an unfair comparison. The other one, I like you mentioned, I do like the placement of the hand of the controller. From our perspective, it could have been a finger pointing at them, right?
Yeah, I thought that too.
Yeah. I think I said this before. The team feels older under Greg LaRocque's pencils, and they all look like 20-somethings. Which I talked about the age before. They probably are 20-somethings, but I don't know, something about it feels. They feel really aged, or they feel. It's weird. I sort of wrote in my notes, I think I'm projecting this, but when under Giffen and under Lytle, there still was kind of like a youthfulness, and LaRocque makes them superheroes, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just something about it. So I don't dislike it. I think the cover is fine. It's a nice... I like seeing the 5 characters, because right away, if you're reading this book, if you're a fan of the book, you're like, oh, I remember them. Okay. It's going to be a story about them. That's cool. But yeah, that's pretty much... I didn't really have a preference over either of them, because they're so different, and... not one of my favorite covers, I guess. Not that we're playing that game, but...
Yeah.
All right, so if we go to the story, as you said, no good deed goes unpunished. I wondered if you really liked that splash page, because I do think it's cool. I think it's one of the best images in the book, featuring one of your favorite characters. Part of the reason why I think when I was reading this, at first I was kind of like, oh, what's going on? They're on a mission to just save a city, an agricultural center, because there's these like tsunami waves coming at them. And I think I even said last episode, I was like, ugh, I'm tired of these missions where they just go off and like, stop the weather or something. But
okay, yeah. Now that you mention it, that has been happening a lot. But I guess in the past, at least some of them, they were actually acts of sabotage. But right. Yeah, you're right. There is a recurring theme here. That's funny, because I had the opposite reaction, because I wasn't thinking of previous issues. Because on page 3, and by the way, Peter, do you notice? Oh, well, I don't know. In my issue that I have, there are no page numbers. They've dropped the page numbers,
which makes for hard notations.
Yeah.
Gotta keep counting.
But I wondered, because at a certain point in comic book printing history, the major companies did drop page numbers, and I was wondering, is this the beginning of that, or is this a mistake? Yeah. So I have to take a look at next issue, but anyway, I love that the scene between Phantom Girl and Colossal Boy. And they're talking about what Ultra Boy did, staring down the waves with his flash vision, which I thought that was a cool application of his power. Seemed, although, kind of wonky, but because, it's waves and wind and stuff. But anyway, it works, it's comics. And Phantom Girl is actually,
bragging. She's giggling.
Yeah, bragging. Yes. Yeah, bragging about her boyfriend, which I thought was just adorable. And Colossal Boy's reaction is, he laughs. He says, "That's great. This really is my favorite kind of mission. No villains, nothing rotten, just a chance." Oh, no, this is Phantom Girl saying this now. "Just a chance to use our powers to help people out." And he replies, "Wish we had time for more of these." And I thought that was just a really cool, a bit of back and forth between the two. Despite what you were saying before about these kinds of missions, it's still kind of neat to be reminded that the Legion is here for more than just internalized superhero supervillain battles, which is, although of course that's what brings a lot of us readers to these stories. But I like these little kind of breather, interstitial kinds of activities that they're showing here.
And at least this one is needed because it does have a point. Like it's just sort of a backdrop to the larger story. So you have to put these characters somewhere.
Yeah.
For them to be taken away from,
Mm-hmm.
But it just, I think some of it is, I'm looking forward to stories that don't start where the team is just hanging out looking for, and then something happens. And,
and that's true.
It's a large team. They should be on 5 different missions, and I don't know.
Well, and to that point too, even though I love the 5 characters that are the major focus of this particular story, and like I said, it kind of helps to wrap up a previous action on their part. It'd be nice to focus on some different Legionnaires.
Do you recognize Mana 5?
No, it rang a bell and I forgot to look it up. So I'm glad to hear that it has something to do other than tickling my brain with the name. So what is it?
Well, it's interesting that last episode when we talked about the Tales reprint for that book, it was 2 Wildfire stories, right? Because it was a Crisis story, so they didn't reprint the Crisis story a year later. They just decided to have these 2 wildfire stories. His basically his origin.
Oh, is that the planet that he was on?
That's the planet where he blew up on. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So they came back to it.
Okay, that's awesome.
The Tales reprint doesn't happen for a year later, but I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe they're like, okay, the next story starts on Mana 5. Why don't we do the one story that actually takes place on Mana 5? I don't know if that was their thinking. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the planet.
But, again, I have to compliment Mr. Levitz for pulling out these old references to things, because that's pretty cool that they brought that back.
When you read this and you started to see them all popping back, and you kind of already talked about it, and then we get the controller, did it make sense? Does the mission make sense, or does the target make sense? Did it, or not make sense, but did it work for you? That the reason that they're getting sucked away is because the Sun Eater was going to be created for this, as you called it, war world, which is exactly what I thought of too. But Tiraz, does that work? Is that a good? Do you think that's a good? Is that the best Levitz could come up with, or does it work for this, or what?
Yeah, the only thing I have an issue with regarding this is when we get that scene where the Legionnaires are gathered at their mission table or briefing table, whatever that thing is that we've seen before, where they're all sitting around in that rectangular area. And then another controller shows up and basically spells it out for us. And it seems just, I don't know, the controllers are kind of capricious creatures and whatnot, but it just seems really silly that they would decide to punish their brethren in this way and then involve the Legionnaires as well. It seems like a weird setup. If you think about it too much, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, given that the threat of Tiraz to that part of space. It's like, well, why would you not take care of it? Because you can, and leave it up to 5 people who have, in some cases, very not actionable powers against a force like that. But why? What do you? What's your thoughts on that, Peter?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Obviously Levitz is trying to connect back to that story to show that their actions back in issues 7 and 8 of destroying a world that was creating a Sun Eater just because they were like, oh no, a Sun Eater, but they didn't realize what it was actually being built for. Mm-hmm. The controllers coming and kind of going, okay, we're going to steal these Legionnaires. We're going to bop them on the nose and make them wipe up their own pee. I just thought it was like, okay, you're trying to prove a point, but you could use the entire Legion to prove your point.
Exactly.
And I guess that wouldn't be a story then, then it's not a callback, right? I also thought, are the controllers that weak that they can't do it themselves? I guess I can't really get a scope of how big this planet is. I mean, it looks like it's bigger than the other planets that it's around. But I sort of wanted to go like, the controllers are on par, or at least they will be, with the Guardians of the Universe. And maybe it's just that they just don't want to get their hands dirty. So some of that decision making was, it felt a little forced for the story, but then I was like, okay, in the grand sort of science fiction aspect of it, if you want to look at it like a Star Trek episode, that's exactly what they would do too.
Mm-hmm.
They would say, you stopped this from happening in the past, so now you have to make it work, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of concept. So, and I'm on record as liking the controllers, but and they're kind of benevolent, but yet still kind of arrogant in this issue. Trying to teach a lesson. We're teaching everybody a lesson, We're going to take your Legionnaires, but you can't do anything about it. Here, I'm going to show you this world, and you have to do something. I'm not going to do anything. My powers are reduced.
Yeah.
My breath, So.
Yeah, it was Tiraz was enough of a threat that they were going to unleash a Sun Eater on it, and yet when that plan fell through, then they're just being, I don't know, mean. So is Tiraz enough of a threat to stop it with let me rephrase that. Tiraz was enough of a threat to stop it with a Sun Eater, but now that that's not an option, then we're just going to take a big chance on the safety of the galaxy with 5 Legionnaires and a depowered controller. That doesn't make any sense.
Plus, it's not a sun, right? So why?
Yeah,
unless they were tweaking the Sun Eater,
mm-hmm.
Or maybe because of the engines that are powering the planet, maybe that's what the Sun Eater was going to go after. I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting trying to get too specific with it.
Yeah, I think we're being too picky with the plot points, but it's the point remains. And
it was kind of interesting to see, like once you saw Phantom Girl disappear, Ultra Boy disappear, and then Element Lad disappears, okay, obviously from there you're like, all right, if you don't know already, then that you have to know then. We get a couple things out of this that I liked. So there are two interludes in this issue. One of them with the Science Police that you mentioned that has nothing to do with this story, I don't think. Then the second one, when the Legionnaires are all like, oh my god, where did they go? And White Witch is trying to find them. And Sensor Girl says, maybe I can help, and her and Mon-El try to help, and they can't think of anything. So then we get another sort of interlude that spins right out of that, the whole thing with Brainy, right? Which I'm sure we're gonna talk about that page. Story-wise, I liked that Levitz was able to put in his other subplots, but yet still make them part of the larger story.
Yeah.
I kind of still want to focus on the larger story, which is why I'm not going into that little subplot just yet. But I liked that on second reading that it wasn't just one of those, oh, look, Proteans are picketing, or, and you're like, okay. Only really the Science Police one was the one that I was like, probably, I don't even think we needed that this issue.
Mm-hmm.
We could have done without that one. But then the other one was nicely put into the story.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that was good.
And it ties into the second story in the issue.
Right, yeah. So if we go back to Tiraz and this whole control, I know I'm sort of bouncing around here, because I don't think there's like major large takeaways. Maybe you have something, but I didn't really get anything.
No.
Yeah. We get another connection with the Legion of Supervillains. I thought he was captured, but maybe not. I don't know Tyr. I don't know him as a villain outside of the Baxter run. Clearly it's Tyr. When you see the one guy come zooming in on his little sky cycle, you're like, oh, okay, so it's Tyr, the guy with the detachable. He almost looks like a He-Man villain. With the detachable wrist gauntlet thing and the mohawk and the red skin. And I like that I get a kind of like pirate thing from him. I don't know if you've read Tyr before, the Baxter run, but the guy calls him a captain. he has this floating planet. In one of the letter columns, they said one of Tyr's first appearances, they called him the Scourge of the Galaxy. Like, that just all sounds very piratey to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't have a lot of history with this villain. So, I'll be once I reread the next chapter, we'll get more of it. But here he is, another Legion of Supervillains making their mark on the book.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with the character other than when we saw him involved in the launch story starting with issue 1, but I know he's made some previous appearances, and I thought we probably get into that probably next issue. But I actually, when I first saw him this character appear, I thought, oh, that's Tyr. But then the way he's talking, let me take you to my captain. He seems more like a soldier than a Scourge of the Galaxy type character. So so that had me questioning: is this actually Tyr, or do they all look like Tyr? So now I'm very curious to read next issue.
I think his origin story has something to do with, or one of his stories has something to do with Timberwolf, right?
That rings a bell, but I don't know the details.
All right. Maybe we'll look at that for next issue. Like, just
one
of the things I'm finding as we're doing these episodes is it's kind of fun to at least pop back to some of the stories I've never read.
Yeah.
Even if I'm reading them out of order, just to put some context. So maybe we'll see what issues that is and get a nice connection there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to talk about with this main story here?
Really, it's just a couple little things, not really relating to the overall plot, just kind of some character moments or some scenes. So it was a fine enough story. I just didn't really have much to say about what's going on because there's not a whole lot going on. They disappear. We figure out why they disappeared, and then we're introduced to the threat, and then the issue ends.
Yeah.
Or, excuse me, or the story ends this issue. So, yeah, it has more to do with, like I said, some minor moments or whatever, one of which I've already mentioned. And, I wanted to compliment at least one thing about the art. So,
well, let's go to the ending first, and then
okay.
we'll do our smaller bits. Because I did like that it ends with Element Lad and the Controller.
Yes.
Because so did issue 7. It ended with at least Element Lad, where he made the decision, or he had to make a choice, right? He said he needed to make a choice, and then they said next issue to destroy a world. In this issue, he has to make a choice, but what's the next issue? To control a world, right?
It's almost as if Levitz is a writer or something.
Yeah. I know they made the choice back in issues 7 and 8 to destroy the world because at that time they just believed it was uninhabited, right? So they could do that. But here's a world that is inhabited with these, even if they are villains, and he's taking such a strong stance. So, connecting back to our general thoughts where you said Element Lad was in the right, this is what a hero does. If we connect it back to their decision before, why is he so black and white now? Why was he so black and white back then? Where he was like, yes, destroy the world, boom. They turned it into a nuclear bomb, and Ultra Boy threw a rock at it, and it blew up. And now, because of the code, which I'm not arguing the code, but you know what I mean? Like, why is it so interesting that he's so defiantly saying no this time?
Mm-hmm.
Even though he understands the threat now, but back then, were they really sure of the threat other than that it was a Sun Eater? I don't know. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think his reaction is not only just based on the Legion code, but his own history. With his entire race being slaughtered by the character whose name I cannot recall at the moment.
Roxas.
Yes, Roxas. That's right.
Yeah.
And so it totally makes sense from a psychological standpoint that he would react so strongly based on that alone. And then you have the Legion Code on top of that, even though that's what he's saying. But to me, it's the underlying current is the other thing. So it makes a lot of sense there. And yeah, even though the past action, they made it a point to point out very specifically in that issue that they were all these robots around, and they did abscond with the servant in that story before they destroyed the planet. But my reaction then when I was reading that issue was like, are you sure that there's nobody else that's living on this planet? I mean, penetrative vision, can only do so much. But anyway, I'll take their word for it at this point anyway.
Yeah, and really, who has the right to destroy any world, whether it's inhabited or not?
Yeah, exactly. I had the same thought too. Yeah. But yeah, it does seem a bit contradictory. I agree. But at the very least, in this moment, it makes a lot of sense to me that Element Lad is saying what he's saying and acting in the way that he is.
Yeah, that's a good point you mentioned about his home world. I totally forgot that. So that you're right. That's exactly what that scene is. Now that I think about it with what you said, and it does mean a lot. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
It also reminds me a lot of, you mentioned Star Trek before. We do bring up Star Trek quite a bit in this,
right?
in our discussions here. But there's a lot of connections to Star Trek, and there are quite a few episodes of the old series where, well, I guess even Next Generation, where they played on this as well, where they encounter a life form that can be destructive to others in the galaxy, but yet their mission is to seek out new civilizations, new life, and all that stuff, and try to make contact. So what are the choices you make to save your area of space, but then also somehow connect with this other thing? That's not quite the situation here, but I see some minor connections to that.
I think that has something to do with what you said earlier about stories not always resonating when they're just sort of like hero versus villain, like or generic superhero book of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like the science fiction aspect to this Legion era is more Star Trek than Star Wars, say, for instance. Yeah. It's not space opera. And when it gets to space opera, maybe that's when the Legion book doesn't always succeed. But when it's quote-unquote science fiction, comic book science fiction, it works.
Mm-hmm.
And those stories resonate. Or works better, right?
Yeah.
Or just add something to it. It's just like as another team book that we reference a lot is X-Men, right? Like Claremont's X-Men, when it was philosophizing and moralizing and asking the hard questions, that's when that book was amazing. And when it became about villain of the week and event of the month, then it was like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, just generally speaking, comic books aside, any type of entertainment that I enjoy the most is always about exploring those questions, those philosophical and what makes us human type of questions, and yeah, I get bored when it's just about a car chase or a shootout or things like that. It's just okay, I have to endure this for the next 5 minutes before we get to the good stuff.
One thing about the controllers art-wise that bugs me, the controller that visits the Legion is the one from issue 7 and 8. The design is exactly the same. I looked it up as told through LaRoque's pencils. But the controller that's with the Legion, the 5, the Lost Legion 5, is not the same. The design is different. The boots are different. The tunic is different. I'm really confused by that. I think it's a mistake. I don't know what his script might have said that made LaRoque not make them the same, but it's very jarring, and I don't get it. Because the controller that's with Element Lad in that group, he says, I was depowered. It was my responsibility to come up with something to destroy this world. I failed because of you. But if you go back to issue 7 and 8, that's not what he looked like. He looked like the controller that visited the Legion in their headquarters. And I'm so confused by that.
I have a no prize explanation, Peter.
Gimme.
He was demoted. This and they wear their status in their clothing.
So he's demoted from one scene to the next. Is that what you're saying?
Wait. Sorry,
because we see the controller visit the headquarters first, right? And that's the controller that has the same design as issue 7 and 8.
Right.
And then the very next scene is the Lost Legion 5 with the controller that looks different.
Yes.
So you're saying,
are you saying that that's the same controller in both scenes?
I'm saying does I don't know. Because if it's supposed to be different, then the one that visited the Legion should not. Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying the controllers all look alike.
Or they display their station by their uniform, and they have different uniform. Much like again in Star Trek, you have the different ranks, and you can be demoted, right. And so the stripes are different. So that's kind of how I took it.
Oh, okay. Because they are different. When you see a controller in different Legion books, there are differences in their costuming. Mm-hmm. I just was really put off. I didn't understand it.
Well, yeah, if you're a reader like you and you're looking at those the past issues and doing these comparisons, yeah, that would come across very confusingly.
Yeah, so I like your supposition though. I'll take it.
I had to make sense of it too, because I noticed the difference in costuming as well.
Because he does say we, right? The one that visits the Legion. Let's see. Well, first he says, you don't need to look for the Legion. I have taken them, right? You don't need to look for your members. I have taken them. Okay, so he says I. Waste not wrath on me, Legionnaires. Your fellows have been taken to complete a task they interrupted on their journey through limbo. Okay, so that could just be anybody saying that. They have presumed themselves worthy to weigh the fates of worlds themselves, even as we immortals might. All right, so he's talking about all the controllers. Now they must do what they have placed beyond our unimaginable power, or failing that, watch your Earth and galaxy suffer the price. Seek them not, Legionnaires. Pray with us that we controllers may have just cause to return them to you alive and successful. Farewell. So you don't really get a sense, other than him saying, I have taken them, of was he that one? Because the next controller says, the thing about being depowered. Let's see, where is that? There's no page numbers. It's when the moon gets blown up. It was my task to scourge that festering sore of destruction from the universe, mine to keep its evil from harming the inhabited worlds. I built a mighty sun eater, and you dared thwart me. You destroyed my weapon. You have left me weaponless, a failure. My fellows have taken much of my power from me as a just but terrible punishment. I am diminished. Yet before I fade, I have one last task. So, yeah. All right. No, I think it's unclear, but I like your no prize thought.
But yeah, this is an example of some storytelling that they could have cleaned up, I think, very easily just by having the same character show up, the same in the same outfit and everything, so that we're not confused. But yeah, whatever.
That's a strike on LaRoque's part, I think.
Oh, you think? Not Levitt's? I think it's both of them.
Yeah, you could be right. And the editor. Let's put it on the editor.
Oh, yeah. Karen Berger, how dare you?
Karen Berger. What did she ever go on to do? I know,
she's never going to amount to anything in comics.
We're such backseat driver.
I know, right?
Editors here. Let's see what else. When the Legion meeting on pages 7 and 8 when the controller comes in. Couple things here. I love Polar Boy making basically a rookie mistake. He clearly doesn't read Legion comics, right? Because he says, "Hey, can you fill us in? Some of us are new here." I'm like, all you guys do is just hang out at the headquarters. You didn't read up on the last year of adventures, that was a very rookie mistake, I think. And it's not even exposition because Paul Levitz doesn't actually continue the thought,
right,
with any of them.
Yeah, it's again because all 5 of the new Legionnaires are sitting in a row with each other. So again, it's just calling attention to the newbies, as Levitz has been doing for several issues now.
Right. I mean, I sort of like the way Sensor Girl goes about it, where she's like, well, I wasn't there last time, but maybe I can help. And it could be a clue to her identity in hindsight, now that I think about it. Not that I don't think she knows exactly what's going on, or maybe she does. I mean, gotta watch what I say, because
well, it's I bumped on what she said too, because I was in no position to assist you last time. That implies to me that she was aware of it. And I'm playing that game too, because I know who she is, but we're still trying to figure out who she is in this where we're at in the timeline. But it seems like an odd phrase that if anybody in Brainiac 5, for example, he would go. I think he would kind of latch onto that and go, wait a minute, what is that? That was a very peculiar phrasing on your part. What does that mean? And I think you could very easily narrow down potential suspects based on that comment.
Listeners, we're still playing cagey with it. We're trying not to give it away until we can absolutely no longer give it away for those people who are maybe, playing the home game and reading one issue at a time. Whereas I'm sure there's some listeners who obviously have either read this before or maybe read ahead and they already know. But maybe I'll have to keep that in my notes so we come back to it later.
Yeah, good point. And since we're here, Peter, the Block's reaction... maybe I'm just reading again. I do this a lot. I read too much into what's shown on the page, because he kind of stutters. Sensor Girl. Like either they're changing Block's personality, or it just seems like a weird reaction to what she said. It was, because what she said was not, I don't know, wasn't that big of an announcement or anything. It wasn't bombastic. It wasn't, I don't know. And yet he... Oh,
I see what it is.
Yeah. So, what's your take on that?
So see how he has motion lines around his head?
Yeah.
And so does Timberwolf.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're reacting to what's behind her.
Oh.
So he's going. He's almost like going to say, "Sensor Girl, you should shut up because there's somebody behind you."
Oh my God, I totally misread that scene. You are correct. Yeah, and yeah, everybody's looking. Yeah, I totally misread that. Okay, you can erase that from the audio, Peter. If you I'm just kidding.
No, because I didn't. I took it as a reaction to what she said too. Almost like maybe she stood up abruptly or something. And Block is so But now that I look at it and I see that Timberwolf, it's tough because the way LaRocque has drawn it, they do look like they're looking at her. So I don't know what other angle would have been better to kind of suggest that they were looking beyond her.
Yeah.
Well, then we get the voice.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's very much the construction of that particular panel that just threw me. But a few pages before, where the scene with Block, Timberwolf, and Colossal Boy, well, Element Lad too, Block seems to be very surprised a lot in this issue, and so I think I was just kind of touching on that when I got to that scene.
Right.
I mean, Block literally gasps when Colossal or the Element Lad, when he disappears in front of his eyes. So I think I'm making too much of
anything
it.
With him.
Well, and since we're talking about Block, you notice that his facial features have changed again.
Yeah, that's an art thing that I was like, I don't like that.
Yeah. And I know Block has continually evolved over time, and I think it had more to do with perhaps the artists who just didn't like his look and they kept tweaking it. But we found out later that there was a reason behind that in story. So I can kind of forgive it, but it's like I don't like that look.
Now, the thing that I'm curious to make a connection with for a later issue is Mon-El's reaction in this same scene. He seems a bit on edge. And there's a couple other times where he's kind of been a little brusque, a little abrupt, little elderly statesman, but a little bit on the mean side.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get a Mon-El spotlight in about another 2-3 issues. And I'm gonna wonder if maybe I can make a backwards connection to that.
Yeah, that would make sense, because Shady, he's Mon starts talking about this stuff before the controller shows up, and she's like, "Gently, my love," and I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah, like, why would he be so? He's another one that doesn't get a lot of spotlight in this particular version of the run, title, or
is this whatever. Does this have to do with what happened in the Tales book before it became the reprint?
That's been a while, though.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, again, I know it doesn't necessarily connect to that story that's coming up. I think, but it might be fun to headcanon that and just kind of go, oh, that's why he's reacting like that. Mm-hmm. He doesn't realize what's going on just yet.
He comes across to me, especially these last several issues, as someone who would love to see some things change about how the Legion runs, but he doesn't, and he voices them kind of passive aggressively, but he doesn't run for Legion leadership, for example. So he's willing to stand on the sidelines and say, you guys, you could do better, but then he doesn't actively help in changing that.
I mean, that's what I loved his characterization in the 5 Years Later, because he always was on the fringe, right? He would just like take off and go visit the universe, he's like one of those characters that when he shows up, if you're in need of help, when he shows up, you're like, okay, everything's going to be right, and I like that characterization. So I think that's a good, what you just said really matches. Like I always tonally feel that he is on the outside, whether it's because he's long lived, he's ultra powerful, no pun intended. He's not Superman, he's almost beyond that in many ways. And even though these are characters that should be in their teens, I don't know. I guess it's like the Captain America thing. He could still be a teen, but he's lived for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So he has this other sort of mentality to him.
Well, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. He's got no patience for these youngsters.
Yeah.
And their little squabbles and their debates and all that. He's a man of action. He's like, well, we should be taking care of this. Let's go.
I have a point to Mon-El or around Mon-El that was based on something that was earlier on in the issue when Colossal Boy is talking to Phantom Girl and saying, no, I don't need your help. What I'm doing calls for, powers that aren't so subtle, right? And they've mentioned that before in terms of certain people's abilities, being either offensive or defensive or subtle or whatever. And I wrote a note here as a tangent. I said, wait a minute. How are the Legion letting Ultra Boy, Mon-El, and I guess you could say Superboy, even though he's an honorary member or reserve member or whatever, how are they all letting them in the Legion if you're not supposed to duplicate powers?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, I get it. Ultra Boy has his shtick. He can only use one at a time, but that's like a cop-out. And what's Mon-El's power? The same thing as Ultra Boy's. Same thing as Superboy's.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. How did they skirt that? That might be something as I randomly dig into Silver Age Legion. Like, how did they skirt that issue?
Well, you got Supergirl too at times as well. So
and yeah, there you go, Supergirl. So that was just something I wrote in my notes with this issue. I only have a few other things. I didn't like Timberwolf's dialogue. I didn't like the way Levitz handled him. I thought we moved beyond this sort of characterization, or if he's still who he is, that the others. I was hoping maybe the way Colossal Boy treats him. I was like, I'm kind of done with the Legion hound dogging him, especially after his finishing up Karate Kid's will. I liked that storyline, and I liked what happened to him, and I didn't like his characterization here.
Yeah, I've long not liked his characterization. Seems like they'll do things like the story you mentioned with Karate Kid's will, and then it's like 2 steps forward and 4 steps back. In his case,
yeah. And then they're just back at the gym again, waiting for the next adventure.
Yeah.
Just like everybody's waiting for the next adventure.
Although he does say here, how come we're only on call when he's at who's he referring to?
Element
Lad, yeah. When he's at headquarters and not on a mission. And Block says, I had not thought of that, my friend. What's going on here politically with Element Lad and some of his other teammates?
Yeah, they treat Block and Timberwolf as sort of, not having the responsibility enough to handle things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like giving and Block and Timberwolf are kind of like perfect strangers, right? Like they're these bumbling buddy. It's almost out of like a sitcom. Right?
Yeah. That's a very good point.
Which is such an 80s thing, it's like bosom buddies or whatever, but I'm a little tired of it because we've gotten past the Timberwolf. We've gotten past showing that he's not as responsible as maybe we want him to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have much else about the Controller storyline. So like I wrote here, page 12, Shady notices that Brainy is still in mourning over Supergirl.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this sequence and this issue connects more to issue 16 than it does to issue 18. It's almost like they skipped over that crisis issue again.
Yeah.
Because he's back to being not as despondent as he was in issue 16, but he's not better yet about his reaction to Supergirl's death. And I like that, to go to that one-page inset about him trying to figure out Sensor Girl's identity, I like that his reaction or his speculation is based on his emotionality to Supergirl's death. Like, it's not rational.
Wait, they're really pouring it on in terms of perhaps making a connection to Supergirl?
Yeah.
It seems like it anyway.
But it makes sense, at least with where he's been, though, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what I like. That it's not just, they're not just bringing up the Supergirl thing because that's what readers are thinking. They're keeping it in line with Brainy's history of being manic, just like he references, right? He's like, I can't lose control again. So it's a little bit of a step backwards from issue 16, because by the end of 16 we thought, okay, he kind of he feels like he's okay with it, he's accepting history, but now you throw this added layer of, oh, but what if Supergirl's right here all along? Uh-oh.
But I kind of like that, whereas I don't like the Timberwolf thing. I kind of like this with Brainy because, even though, emotional healing is not a strict, you reach a certain point and then everything before that is gone, right? It sometimes resurfaces and odd, you react oddly emotionally at times depending on some certain stimuli, right? And so I can forgive that this particular depiction based on that.
Yeah, I liked it. Plus, he names the non-story arc, right? He says, "Who is Sentinel?"
Yeah.
I think that's the first time we've seen it said that like that.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think, yeah, in story. And then he goes to rattle off two of the theories that are popular with readers, right? Like he says, can she see through walls, which is a very Supergirl thing, right? And then he says, or read my thoughts, which is everybody who thinks that she's Saturn Girl or some family member or Saturn Queen. So Levitz is pushing this thing, knowing that in the next 4 or 5 issues, he's going to wrap this storyline up.
Yeah, he's definitely having fun at the reader's expense, I think.
Oh yeah.
You touched on before that scene where Shady makes a comment about Brainiac 5 and how he's looking. You look awful, she says. And, he just totally blows her off. And then her reaction, I thought, was kind of, it's kind of like someone, paying you a compliment and you're like, whatever. And then they get all indignant with you, right? She says, so much for being comforting. I've touched warmer ice crystals than Brainy since Supergirl died. But then, fortunately, Levitz undercuts that by having her say, I guess I'd feel as rotten if I lost Mon-El. So, she's being depicted as not having just paid lip service to Brainiac, or at least reacting like a rejected teenager when, you tried to help somebody and they're like, well, get out of my face. And you react angrily, I guess. But it was an interesting moment for Shadowlass because we don't really see or know a lot about her, how she is now. It's mostly in reaction to Mon-El or her people, So it's, at least Levitz is trying to, I guess, touch on her a little bit too, as one character among 25 that he's got to juggle.
Yeah, she's always had a mean girl attitude, though. Like I think we talked before. Her her Phantom Girl, Ultra Boy Mon-El, they're like a power couple clique.
Sure.
And they've ragged on Wildfire, they've ragged on a couple other men in the things. So when she said that, I was like, ooh, Shady, come on, stop being shady. Like, she can be that way a couple times. What were some art things that you, if you haven't already mentioned them, that you liked or that you were going to mention?
Let's see here. I already talked about the faces stuff, but that scene where you talked about the controller showing up at Legion HQ, that one page, whichever page that is, as he's talking, you see, he's on the right of the panel, and you got space behind him, and notice how the space is kind of bleeding into the room, almost like he's in another dimension, and it's kind of invading the area. And the next panel down, that big area, there's space all around, we're seeing him from different perspectives, and it's almost overtaken the Legion room. You know, I just thought that was really cool the way they depicted that.
There was the 3 panels where Phantom Girl disappears. There's like these 3 vertical panels. And one of them, she's getting ready to fly, then she does fly, and then she disappears. And like the first panel, Colossal Boy's sort of like looking at her, and then he turns away, and then he looks back. Like I like the sequentials there. There's a lot to like in the artwork in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like I said before, I think LaRocque is getting more comfortable with what he's doing, even if we don't necessarily care for it every time with how he's showing stuff. It's like the panels with where they're confronting Tiraz, and there's a lot of this kind of grayish panel background stuff. And I get why that we're seeing that, because it's supposed to be this huge planet, right? That's the backdrop, but it's like there's a lot of it, and it's just not very interesting.
It's just their version of the Death Star.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else for that chapter.
I think, yeah, that's it for me as well.
Oh, we didn't mention the science police thing, but that's because I think I don't know what they're trying to say. You had a thing about that though, right? Didn't you? Something about Gigi and Siobhan.
Well, yeah. I was just curious how you reacted to that, because Gigi's kind of throwing some shade at Siobhan.
Yeah, it's Gigi.
All right.
I think some of it is well, it's interesting as we get into the second part of this issue, which threw me back to a previous issue, which does have something about Siobhan Aaron and being a Legion liaison officer. You know, like she has her own place in Legion history because she was the first Legion liaison officer, and maybe like the other SP officers are like, oh. It's kind of like when I was in grade school. I used to go to this program, like some of the top kids. We used to from all different grade schools. We used to go to this sort of elevated course, but we all had to leave the school to do it, and it was called I think it was called like the Berks Educational Enrichment Program, and they called it BEEP, right? So every time we came back and went into a class, like all the other kids would go beep, 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 beep. But I'm like, all right, you're making fun of something that like we're learning computers and we're in the early 80s, you know, and like we're doing cool stuff, you know. So I feel like that's what the science police are doing here. They're poking at her because they're just jealous.
Yeah, that's how I took it, for sure. But I guess I hadn't really seen Gigi react to Siobhan specifically that way, so it was kind of surprising.
Yeah. And the whole thing is just a subplot for this whole police mind wipe thing, which we're not going to get to for a whole year or whatever it is.
Oh,
but,
wow.
At least another... Yeah, it's like a year. And that scene ends so abruptly. Like, oh, Siobhan, you got a message. Meh, that's it. There's nothing else. What was the message? That Element Lad disappeared? I don't know. Like, that's it. That was strange. That was an unnecessary scene.
Well, they had to fill the, what? I don't know how many pages this is. 18 pages, something? Whatever it is.
Yeah. Plus the backup tale.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go to the backup tale. Do you have a synopsis for this? Or
I do, a brief one.
Okay, good.
It's a brief story. This is Freedom of Choice, written by Paul Levitz, with artists Chuck Patton and Mike DiCarlo, who are listed as guest artists, which I thought that was really cool. John Costanza, Carl Gafford, Karen Berger, filling their same roles. So in this short story, Invisible Kid has sought the aid of Dr. Gimmel to cure himself of his aberrant teleportation power that he's been lamenting for several issues now. Gimmel tells him that he can remove one or the other power or both. Gimel then demonstrates a rare bedside manner, which I thought was really cool, imploring Invisible Kid to give up both of his powers and the Legion. Quote, "Be finished with this legion of constantly hurt heroes," unquote. Invisible Kid, for some reason, wanders Medicus 1, contemplating his future, first by recounting his past. We get a bit of his Legion of Superheroes Annual Number 1 origin story. Then his present by foiling some drug thieves, and then deciding his future to stay as Invisible Kid, content to be a Legionnaire, and as Jacques says, on his own volition. So yeah, I was, Gimel is one of those characters like, yeah, he's the guy that he's the doctor who's always complaining and whatnot. But the Levitts actually gave him some depth in this issue, which I found quite refreshing. I mean, he's even smiling at Invisible Kid when he says that.
Right.
So, wow.
I mean, some of it could just be that he wants one less person to look after, but
don't ruin this for
vouchers. Me. Oh, sorry. I'm just glad this is wrapped up.
Yeah. It wasn't going anywhere.
No.
Although I kind of thought that whole teleportation thing was kind of a neat take on, expanding the power. But then it would be like you were saying before about Mon-El and Superboy and all that. Is then he'd have two powers, and it doesn't. I'm not sure where Levitts was going with this to begin with when he introduced this idea, but obviously he's decided to shut it down.
Yeah, I think that the last bit of dialogue is really the heart of it all, where, like you said, I shall be a Legionnaire with powers of my own volition at last. You mentioned the Legion of Superheroes Annual 1. Eric and I talked a little bit about it before we started recording. I've never read that issue from 1982. It's the annual that kicks off, starts right before the Great Darkness Saga. The letter column at the time says that it was released like a week before. And it actually has some Great Darkness Saga prologue stuff in it, which is interesting. Some little panels here and there. But that annual, I had never read it before, so I'm reading it, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to take away from it. But one of the biggest things is just how much Invisible Kid, Jacques Foucault, was thrown into not only having these powers, but then nominated by Brainiac 5 to become a member of the Legion. Like, that wasn't in Jacques' mind. None of this was, right? He just brought his sister, or his sister was brought to Legion headquarters because she had some ailment, and maybe Brainiac 5 would be able to cure her, and then she gets zapped with some Computo stuff, and she becomes Computo, and she's wrecking everything. And sort of in a moment of desperation, Brainiac 5 is like saying, hey, go take this serum. Computo won't be able to sense you. We might be able to stop him. So Jacques has to do it. He has to make a choice, right? Like, okay, I'll take this serum and risk dying, or not take the serum, and Computo will burn my sister's body out, by using it. It'll just burn out. So he has this random choice thrown at him to save the day. It's a matter of his life versus her life. Then he has this random decision of, hey, why don't you join the Legion? And he's like, oh, sure, yes, no training whatsoever, sure, yes. I think someone even says something like that. Wildfire, probably. And then he gets his teleportation powers, and now you got this doctor saying to him, I can give you this choice, and he's like, okay. So I like that he is making a decision. It's his decision. It's very much like Lightning Lass, where she went away from the Legion and then became Lightning Lass again, and then joined up and said, I will be a member of the Legion now because I want to be. Not because I'm somebody's sister or somebody's girlfriend. I'm not sticking here because I'm Timberwolf's girlfriend. So I like that connection back to the annual. I'm just glad the storyline's over.
Yeah. Yeah, but it does, the question that it brings up to me is, now that he's reached this decision and he's content to be who he is in the Legion, what does that mean for him going forward? Are we going to see more of him? Are they going to do do, because I kind of feel like they brought in this whole teleportation thing because they didn't know what to do with Invisible Kid. He's a guy who can disappear, and that's it. So let's give him this teleportation power that doesn't quite work well, and now they've taken that away. So what is? I hope that they do something a little bit more with him, because I like this character, and given what you just said about his past and how he was thrown into stuff, I don't think that they adequately have addressed that since his appearance in 1982.
He's kind of stuck between the whole like Timberwolf and Block characterization of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, or we're just going to leave him here until we need him.
Yes,
which is a danger of having that many characters.
That's true,
as you said.
Yeah. I mean, they brought in a new Invisible Kid character because they didn't have one for almost 10 years. So I think 1974 was when Lyle Norg, Invisible Kid 1, was killed, and then, right? Is that right? Yeah, almost 10 years.
Well, and it also speaks to like future science, or to the brilliance of Dr. Gimmel, that he's like, oh yeah, I can take your powers away. Sure, no problem. It's like, wow.
Well, yeah, doesn't it kind of diminish what Lyle Norg developed, or maybe not? It just seems like, well, yeah, this is a very easy thing for us to do, even though the first Invisible Kid was depicted as being brilliant because he developed that invisibility serum.
Well, they did say in the annual, Brainy says in the annual, that you sort of get the sense that it was developed for Lyle.
Oh, yeah, specifically, yes.
Yeah, because Brainy's like, I don't know. You could be allergic to this. You could die. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with the power. Just take it.
As Brainy being Brainy.
Brainy.
Let's just do some quirky science and let's see what happens.
I will say, though, having read that Legion of Superheroes annual now, I really need to start a list of the top most important Legion issues to the Legion history, because that annual is way important. It may not be in like the top 10, but it's got a high ranking, I think, because it's got Invisible Kid. It's the first appearance of Jacques Faucard, first appearance of Danielle Faucard. You got some great Darkness Saga, little prologue-y stuff in there. But you also have, that's the first appearance of Cosmic Boy's look.
That's right.
That's continued to now. Starboy gets a beard in that issue. It brings Siobhan Aaron as the first Legion liaison. That's the issue where she joins up. And I sort of felt like it was a way to grow up, or it was a way for Giffen to kind of put his mark on the book, because the entire headquarters gets a new sort of new sci-fi look to it inside, a new mission monitor board, new portals. Like there's all discussion about there's a headquarters schematics in it, a blueprint. We get a nod to a storyline that comes up after the Great Darkness Saga about why there are no Green Lanterns on Earth. We had just found out that R.J. Brand is Chameleon Boy's dad, so he has a little bit in there. I don't know, just something about it was like, ooh, as an annual, that's a meaty annual.
Yeah, I've always thought that annual is like indicative of what comic book annuals should be.
Yeah.
And it quickly devolved into not being that as the years went by.
Yeah, so that was fun. It was fun to go back to that, and as we'll probably do for next issue, maybe with Tier, it might be fun to kind of retroactively go back and take a look at some things.
Yeah.
So,
what did you what are your thoughts on Chuck Patton and Mike DiCarlo doing the art here?
Not bad, actually.
Yeah.
I'm always a fan of Chuck Patton.
Mm-hmm.
I just found out that he's on Instagram in the last 2 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can look up Chuck Patton, the old Justice League Detroit artist.
Yes.
and DeCarlo's inks were fine. Noticeable, but I thought they still were, somewhat complimentary. Nothing really sort of majorly stood out, but yeah, I liked. Did you like it?
Oh yeah, no, I've always been a fan of Patton's work, and it with DeCarlo, it reminds me of when he was inking. I don't remember the penciler now. Was it Perez on New Teen Titans? There was a run of issues where DeCarlo was inking,
mm-hmm.
and it was very different from Romeo Tangle.
Yeah.
So yeah, but here I think they mesh pretty well. And just to tie things together, I mentioned in the previous segment that Mon-El, Wildfire, and Dawnstar head off to look for their comrades, and they show up here. So I thought that was a nice bit of plot device.
Right.
Have them stop the villains, the actual pirates. Peter, to tie it into that to your comment too.
Well, the letter column in a future issue about this issue, that someone made reference of that, and because I totally missed it, so I missed that the three of them were the same three from the first story. But the letter column, did you read the letter column about this issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, man, the letter writers went all in on the Censor Girl thing. And I think part of it was because they were reacting to that Meanwhile column that we talked about last episode, where Paul Levitz, flat out was like, Censor Girl's a human, and she's been in the Legion before, or she's been seen before, or whatever. Because they're all like, it's Saturn Queen, it's Calorie Queen, it's Supergirl, or somebody said Harbinger, Lila.
Yeah, that was my favorite guess. Somebody also said Zwan as well, because you haven't seen those two characters together yet.
Oh, one of them said it was Danielle Folkart.
Oh wow, that's okay. That's definitely off the cuff guess, or off the wall guess, yeah.
And a lot of them were just happy that Levitz got back to this story, that he followed up a letter writer's concern that that previous story felt unfinished, and they had a lot of readers had high marks for this issue. And then the one takeaway from that letter column. Somebody said, whatever happened to Shrinking Violet and Sun Boy? And I thought, yeah, that kind of fizzled. Unless it was really just, remember when she stuck her hand in his shirt? And I guess that was just her feeling herself, right? She's totally new or not new, she's got this new outlook. She's showing she's not a Shrinking Violet anymore. But then the response that Paul Levitz gave is, there's going to be more on some of these characters. There'll be more on Lightning Lass and Shrinking Violet and these other characters. And I was like, oh, wait. Is that a coincidence that they're side by side? Is that intentional? So.
Well, that's maybe we'll come back to this, but that's interesting because in the Legion Companion, Levitz kind of blows off that whole their relationship being an intentional one on his part.
I'm sort of thinking that's true because as much as I remember the two of them having sort of like a very close friendship, it doesn't really play until 5 years later.
Yeah.
I remember there's one scene between the two of them in the Baxter run that sort of pushes it that way. I think it's coming up in the next bunch of issues, but when we get to it, you'll see it. You'll see it right away, which one I'm talking about. So, but yeah, I think he's right. He's probably right. Doesn't mean it's not fantastic. Though.
Yeah. That's I don't know if I've said this before. I often bring this up whenever I'm talking about comics, but that's what I love about like how over time, other creators come in and they make these connections, whether you like them or not, but it builds on what came before. And
Right.
that's just one of the things I love about superhero comics in particular, is that you get these different takes, and it's like, well, I never thought of it that way. And, it could be a really cool thing, or it could, they quickly they revise it retroactively.
Well, I probably talked way too much about that issue, more than I thought I was going to.
Oh, yeah, I was surprised you.
Yeah, so I apologize. I was a little wordy today. We haven't recorded in a while. No, we've recorded in a while. I don't know. I haven't done a podcast in a while, I should say.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is. I'm just getting antsy. Real quick though, how about that ad, the subscription ad, where you can buy 15 issues for only $18? How great would that be?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Right? Well, it was 12 issues plus you get 3 free. They're really pushing what they're calling the deluxe books, what we call the Baxter books.
Yeah.
Outsiders, Legion, Infinity Inc., Vigilante, New Teen Titans. $18, 15 issues. Oh, those were the days.
Yes. And I think I got some issues of all of those at one point.
Oh, sure. I was getting Legion by subscription and Titans by subscription. Batman and the Outsiders and Infinity Inc. at the store. I did not get Vigilante. I don't know why. I have them all now, but not at the time.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue on in our episodes as we normally do. This is the point where we talk about Who's Who and Legion entries within Who's Who running concurrently with the issue that we talked about. So we're talking about Who's Who number 12, and we have Karate Kid, and we have the Kuns, I forget how we say that. And we're throwing in the JLA Satellite, which we'll get to when we get to. So, Karate Kid. Let's talk about Karate Kid.
So, Steve Lightle and Malstead did the art on this, and I just want to say I love this look of his, that kind of modified gi that he wears, that he's been wearing. I don't know, when did that first appear? Do you know, Peter? That outfit? Because he used to wear that really ugly brown thing.
It's been at least, I want to say, at least going back 280, because I looked up that cover again, and I think he's in that costume in there.
Really? I was thinking it was before that, but okay, doesn't matter. And the other thing about Karate Kid, because now we're talking about a character that's dead in this timeline. So, but he's always bugged me a little bit, not in the same way that he bugged Keith Giffen, which is why he wanted to kill off the character. And we talked about this in a previous issue or a previous episode. But I always forget that his dad was a supervillain, and every time I read that, I'm like, what? And it was referenced in that Timberwolf issue as well. I think that was probably the last time that we saw a reference to his dad being that supervillain character.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing was, you were talking before about the Legionnaires and their powers, and the Legion. Is it Constitution?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they actually call it? Okay. So, only one power per Legionnaire type thing, or no duplicates or whatever it is. But Karate Kid has no powers. He's the Batman of the Legion, right? He's trained himself to be superhuman to a degree, right? And I've never bought that. Because as it says here, he's learned every method of hand-to-hand and armed combat known in the galaxy, and he's a teenager. I do not buy that he, maybe did he have photographic memory? I swear the kid he's a mutant of some kind. He has some ability to be able to do that, to do what he does and do it so well. I mean, he freaking fought Superboy to almost a standstill, at least at first, to prove he was worthy of being in the Legion. I just, in my headcanon, the kid has some sort of meta gene that allows him to do all this stuff.
It's not terribly different from, like Deathstroke or Taskmaster or Prometheus, like these villains who all have the same thing, right? They have such control over their body. They know all kinds of, combat, but they all have things that help them. It's like Deathstroke had a serum. He went through a test. Taskmaster does have photogenic memory or something like that. And Prometheus has his computers or his tech. But, Batman just trains himself. But, right, like, how does someone train himself every form, even, like, every form throughout the galaxy? That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, in some regards, I get why Giffen and company hate him sometimes. And yet, on the other hand, he should be the coolest character ever.
Yes. Well, he had his own series for a while.
Yeah.
During the whole martial arts craze of comics in the 70s.
Right.
So
that's where we get the logo, his title logo here, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
That series, it had one logo for the first 11 issues, and then around issue 12 is when they put this logo on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it comes before that. I've never read it. I've never read that series.
Really? I have several issues in my collection. It was interesting. Well, and there's some other things about this character that I've always kind of thought about. Back to the dad. Why was there more made of that? And maybe there was, and I'm just not aware of it. When he first appeared and stuff. Given that his dad was a supervillain, you could weave that into a tale where he's kind of a pariah in the group because his dad was a supervillain type thing, but they never did that. Back to his training, did Val think his childhood was destroyed with all the training that his sensei had him do for all the every method of hand-to-hand and armed combat known in the galaxy? I mean, that takes a lot of time out of your day to have to learn and train and become a master of. And then finally, did he resent it when they in the 70s Legion books when they tried to make him look more like Bruce Lee? That was a fun time.
Well, we're getting a version of him in the new Legion book. At least I think that's him.
Mm-hmm.
He first appeared in Adventure Comics 346. So did Princess Projectra. So did Pharaoh Lad. So did Nemesis Kid and the Khunds.
Yes. I noticed that as well.
That is clearly 346, and
that should go on your list.
That's on my list, as well as 367, which is an issue that we kept going back to with Karate Kid Sensei, the Miracle Machine, the Controller. Yeah, 346 is way important.
Yeah.
All right, so what about the Khunds?
The Khunds. So my notes here that they're the dark version of the United Planets. The Klingons to the Dark Circle's Romulans. Going back to Star Trek again. Originally, because I looked this up, I was curious because in my mind, Peter, the Khunds are they're like the omnipresent bad guy in the galaxy, and yet when I was kind of digging into their history, they haven't actually appeared in all that many issues.
No.
So they were originally presented. I didn't write down the issue. Oh no, it was 346. Yeah.
Yeah.
Originally presented to be from another galaxy. I think they kind of changed that over time. Their leader Garlak, I thought was interesting. He bore a resemblance to Hollywood's version of Genghis Khan, and that was kind of how they depicted the Khunds, which was also how they kind of depicted the Klingons in TOS. So interesting parallels there.
More Star Trek.
Yeah. My first as I recall, my first introduction to them was Legion 285, but it was really the what's his name? Karlak. Karlak, yeah. His appearance in issue 287, where he fought some of Chameleon Boy's espionage squad before they got stranded on that asteroid, right?
I think so.
I think so, yeah. So I read issue 287. You got this Karlak guy, and it's like, oh yeah, these are the bad guys. These are like I said, these are the Klingons in Legion. But then we haven't really gotten a whole lot of appearances by them, I don't think, since then.
And they've gone from Klingons to Pakleds.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then also, just because I've recently read this, the Earth War story from Superboy 241 to 245. That's a run of issues where I've often, they've made references in other issues that I've read. I often hear, Legion fans talking about the Earth War. And I read that, and and in my mind, that has to do with the Kuns too. But I was surprised to learn when I read that story that while they were a part of the plot, they were really not the quote unquote bad guy of the story. They were manipulated in their involvement in that particular conflict. Mm-hmm. Even though I thought they were central to the war in that story. So
right,
yeah, it's interesting at least from my perspective, how they were built up, and I'm looking into it, and they're really not that important to the Legion. They just make some appearances here and there.
They're just like an ever-present gnat.
That's a really good way to put that.
Yeah. I really like the Dan Jurgens, Greg Theakston art. Gives it like a nice Kirby flair to it.
Oh yeah, that background cool. Especially.
Yeah.
I think that's supposed to be that's Garlak right there off to the right. That first character, I think.
And I'm just surprised that they don't put the pronunciation guide. They don't put the name in the pronunciation guide for who's who.
Oh yeah.
Of all the characters, you don't let us know how they're pronounced.
Yeah.
All right, and then the only thing I have is the JLA satellite. So I think we talked about it. We said, like, our headcanon that Medicus 1, where Dr. Gimmel is, like in the backup to this issue 19, looks like the JLA satellite. So I think it's no secret that a lot of Legion fans just assume that it is the satellite, restored 1,000 years later or whatever. But then, is it the letter column for issue 19 or the letter column in issue 19? A letter writer references Justice League of America 147 and 148, which is the JLA, JSA, Legion team-up. Did you ever read that?
I think I have, actually. I can't remember anything about it, but I'm pretty sure I did.
So it's the JLA and the JSA that they get sucked to the 30th century, I think it's the 30s, 2977 at the time, by Mordru. It's Crisis in the 30th Century, and then part 2 is Crisis in Triplicate. It's not only Mordru, but it's the Demons 3 from early Justice League stories. And the Demons 3 are sort of running around because they're usually trapped within talismans, like this jar and this wheel and this bell, right? So if they're in the talisman, it's like a genie, right? If they're trapped in the talisman, they're all good. So at the end of this two-parter, they don't have the talismans, but what they do is Dr. Fate, and again, they're in the 30th century. Dr. Fate traps the final demon in all of this metallic junk that's sort of floating around in the galaxy, or at least near Earth. And when it all comes together, they reform the satellite in the 30th century, trapping this demon. And at the end of the story, they never say what happens with the satellite. They don't say it disappears. They don't say that it sticks around. But in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you just reformed the satellite in the 30th century. It looks like Medicus 1. It's no longer headcanon to me.
Yeah.
It has to be continuity.
Yeah.
That Medicus 1 is the JLA satellite. And that story was written by Martin Pascoe and Paul Levitz. So, sure, Medicus 1 has a demon trapped within it, but...
That's a strange place to have a medical facility, but okay.
Yeah. So, thanks to that letter writer, Colin, because, I went back to that issue and I went, oh my God. So all of this supposition that I thought Legion readers were just kind of throwing about, that this is a very real story. I mean, the satellite was reformed in the 30th century, and then everybody left, and I don't know, what did they do? They just keep it there? So I'm saying that the JLA satellite, I'm confirming it. Not that anybody needed my confirmation.
He gets the Legion Project Podcast seal of approval.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, you should flip through it. Or maybe that's the one, we should look at, somewhere in our long list, because it's clearly a Legion story. So the other thing I have for Who's Who, the letter column, they talk about how, we're going to do some spin-offs. We're going to do some Who's Who spin-offs. And they mentioned Star Trek because that obviously was there. Legion of Superheroes is mentioned. Clearly they did one for that. They did a 7-issue series for that. But they also mentioned they were going to do one on Teen Titans and Green Lantern Corps. But they never did.
Yeah.
That sucks.
That really surprised me they didn't do it for the Titans at least.
I mean, at that time they had New Teen Titans, they had Tales, they had Teen Titans Spotlight. So that franchise wasn't going away. I don't know. Maybe the Who's Who weren't as popular as we thought they were. I don't know.
It has to be that the sales on the other books just didn't do it.
Yeah, and it's also a logistical nightmare, I'm sure. But I did like that. I like that little bit of history there. There is no Legion appearance, reference, mention, etc. in Crisis on Infinite Earths issue 11, so we don't need to talk about that. Tales 332, which shipped the same month as the Legion issue that we talked about, oddly enough, is a reprint of issue number 7, the first part of the story that we talked about.
Oh,
so that's kind of cool.
Okay. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense they would do that.
Right? I almost wonder if Levitt, they said, okay, well, it's in the reprint, so we might as well do the new story about it too. And then before we get to Millennium, also shipping in the month of November, Booster Gold number 1, featuring everybody's favorite capitalist popularity-seeking superhero. The only reason I'm really bringing it up because there is a Legion reference, Legion of Superheroes reference. Did you get a chance to read that issue or look through it at all?
I did not.
Okay.
But I remember reading it back when it was first published because I think one of my friends was getting that series. But I don't remember the specific Legion reference.
Yeah, Booster was one of those titles. I think you were either reading Booster Gold or you were reading Blue Beetle at the time, but you weren't reading both. I was reading both, but my friends were more Blue Beetle fans, and I was more of a Booster fan. We're gonna have to. I'll keep paying attention to this series because there is a Legion crossover around issues 5, 6, or 6 and 7.
Yeah,
we'll have to read that. But while we're learning who this character is, and he's in Metropolis, and he's got an agent, and he's all about, how can I market myself, and he desperately wants to be a member of the JLA. We learn about him. We learn about Skeets. We don't quite learn about his future. But what we do learn is that he has a Legion flight ring.
That's right.
Curiously enough, it's not drawn on his hand until it's actually brought up. So that was kind of funny by Mr. Dan Jurgens. I was looking all through the issue, and I was like, wait a minute. They don't actually draw the Legion ring on his finger until he says to his secretaries, like, hey, can you call the Justice League? I want to be a team member. Just make sure they're okay with me having a Legion flight ring. So here's this very post-crisis character, and right away everybody's sort of thinking, okay, is he from the future? He has this feeling of being a man out of time, but what time is that?
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna have. I'll keep track of now that the crisis is ending. We'll have to keep track on. I'd like to see where else the Legion is appearing. So that'll be a series we will pay attention to. The Legion also appeared in All-Star Squadron 54, but that's just a crisis riff. It's a one-panel cameo by Sunboy and Block. And then they also had a reprint story in Best of DC Blue Ribbon Digest number 69, which reprinted the Triangle backup story from Tales 320, featuring Sunboy and Gigi Cuisimano and Colossal Boy and Yera. Featured as one of the best stories, so that was interesting. All right. 2 hours in. So that leads us to... I'm just talkative. I hope you had nowhere to go today, Eric. No, we're almost done here. Let's go. Let's go to it. Legion of Superheroes, Millennium issue 2. I think we're also going to throw in some talk about Superman 15, 16. We read it. We think you read it. I don't know. You want to just talk about it? I don't think we need to do a synopsis. We'll probably cover it once we do.
Yeah,
you have a synopsis.
It's just it's constructed very similar to the first issue, where we're just the character of Rose/Thorn is going through various time periods and encountering various characters from DC's future history, and so that's pretty much it.
Right. And we get in this issue, she visits Booster Gold in his time period, and then OMAC in his time period, and then a sort of nondescript, very saga-esque kind of setting within the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Before she finally jumps to the 31st century, where the Legion, the new Legion, will be set.
Yep.
We had some misgivings about the first issue. What did you think of the second issue?
I liked it better. And I don't know if that has to do with the fact that we had the first issue to kind of digest and ponder between the first and second issue. I felt that the story itself, while there's not a lot of story here really, but the theme of self-discovery, inspiration, those came out very clearly to me in the second issue, and so I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and to me it elevated issue 2 above the first one, and I'm. And partly what I say about having time to digest that first issue, because when we talked about it, we're like, Rose and Thorn, really? What? Why? And now it's kind of like, okay, so she's it. So what? But what does that mean to the Legion now? And so we get that. So we kind of get a sense of closure on that aspect of it to a point. And like I said,
to a point.
Yeah, a very little point, very small point. So now I'm really curious what's going to happen with Legion number 1. So in regards to Rose and Thorn. So I guess we'll find out. Hopefully. How did you take this issue generally?
Generally, probably the same as issue 1. I was sort of disappointed. I really felt like these 2 issues should have been 1 issue. Still, I still say it.
Yeah.
Um, there's a couple of things I like. I mean, I do like. So she visits Booster Gold in his time period. That actually does make a little sense because, as we will find out in the Booster Gold series, Rose and Thorn did show up in his series in the 80s. So it's almost like working the opposite. Yeah.
Huh, I did not realize that.
Yeah, she popped up a bunch of times. One of the big villains in Booster Gold at that time was I think they were called like the 1,000.
Oh, yes.
They used to be called the 100, and then they were the 1,000. So that was also a villain group that was wrapped up with the whole Rose and Thorn stuff. And she shows up in issue 2 of Booster Gold. So as I was sort of flipping through those early issues, I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. She is there, so there is some connection there. So it's kind of like a retroactive thing. You know, she's meeting him first before he meets her, you know. I'm a little disappointed in if the sequence of these futures are supposed to play out like this now. They have OMAC well after Commandy.
Yeah.
And if people don't know, it was quickly, I think it was during all the Jack Kirby stuff, or at least after the Jack Kirby stuff in the 70s or early 80s, OMAC was at that time Commandy's grandfather. Mm-hmm. And so now that's not playing out that way. Or I should say the human version of OMAC, Buddy Blank. So, you know, beautifully drawn by Jim Chung. You know, okay, that's fine. Then we get that trippy sort of 2001, you know, I don't know, she's flying through space. I don't know. I don't think anybody online has said that that's a reference to an actual time period. Maybe it's something new. It's beautiful. I thought the artwork is is stunning.
Oh, yeah.
It's nice to see something like that.
Yeah, and that's done by Jeff DeCall.
Yeah.
And yeah. I have, just to tie it into Titans, as we always do on the show, I have I went to Heroes Con a few years ago, and Jeff DeCall was there, and I commissioned a Nightwing from him based on some stuff I saw of his on Instagram. And so I've been following his career since then, and I was very pleased to see him contribute to this book, because it is beautiful, beautiful art. Yeah,
I'm unfamiliar, so that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like your reference about the 2001 stuff, because this very reminiscent of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, and I guess some of it is just to sort of extrapolate further into the future, you know, like just try to make something different, make a part of the DC universe different. And then we finally led to the Legion time, and it's really in that Jeff DeCall stuff that we kind of get what you were referencing, that Rose kind of cements some of the idea of whatever it is she's bringing to the Legion. I don't think we got all of it, like you said, and I guess that's what the Legion book will be about, but I'm almost half wondering if we're going to see Rose in that book.
That's, I mean, if you set up something like this, and I really like the art, and since we're talking about art, I really like the art in this last section. And we've seen that shot, that 2-page spread of the Legion before, and we were in some promo stuff that the DC released, and we were wondering, well, who is that person whose perspective we're seeing, and not obviously we know that now, but so that's what I love about the ending of this particular Millennium issue is, you know, she says, I've come a very, very long way because I have a great deal to share with you. And if they don't work that in, if they don't include her, if they don't tie these things together, then what was the point? And on top of that, you got, I'm skipping ahead to the Superman stuff just briefly here, but so she's here as, you know, she's kind of like, who was that character in the old Legion stories? Marla? Who was...
R.J. Brand's buddy?
Yeah, because he was kind of an adult supervisor, so to speak, of the Legion for a while.
Yeah,
And
or maybe he was wrapped up in Ultra Boy's origin, wasn't he?
Yeah, something to do with that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was kind of there as a mentor, as I recall anyway. And so I'm wondering if she's going to take on that role, because then you have the inspiration of the team, which is supposedly Superboy in this current DC continuity, and the whole Unity Day thing. So how is that going to play out between these two 21st century characters? So that's going to be very interesting.
It's odd because, we got some stuff from the Superman's books that are very, very much Legion stuff, right? Like, they asked John to join Saturn Girl and Supergirl in Superman 15. She says, "We are sort of delegations of the United Planets of our time." Lightning Lad says, "Each of us represents one planet and power." That's all very historical Legion ideas. So my question then is, are they riffing off of her ideas? Because they're a team here at the end of Millennium. I mean, they got Superboy. It's the full complement of characters that we've seen to date. And they're like ready. They got a headquarters. They're ready. And then she comes in to say, "Oh, I have a lot to share with you." So if they didn't have any of those values to begin with, then why did they even form to begin with? Outside of them just saying we're delegates of the UP, or we're coming together like a like a one of those high school clubs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So, like, do we open up the Legion series with, like you said, we never see Rose again, and like they just live on with her values? But then why? Why wasn't Superboy enough? Why wasn't the whole Unity Day enough? Why wasn't history enough? Unless they don't have the historical records, and that's where Rose comes into play.
Right. So
it's a lot of questions that we won't know until that series comes out, as we talked about at the start of this episode. But I just think these two issues, I wish they would have marketed them as being like an addendum to history of the DC universe, like, which I sort of did, but focus more on the art and not on the story, because I felt the story was lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just look at these pretty pages of DC's future. Oh, by the way, there's a character that will connect maybe to the series. I just think it's a jump. Like, I don't like her more just because I read these two issues. I don't think she has anything on paper to show us what she's learned just yet, outside of just living a long time and coming up on these sad sack characters half the time.
Mm-hmm. But it's that interaction that she has with those characters that elevated the issue for me, at least a little bit, because she inspires Booster to go back in time.
Right.
She has OMAC questioning his orders, his programming. And in fact, in that, this doesn't really pertain to that aspect, but there's a line in there that she says, "It's frustrating to see the world get its stuff together again, only to let the greedy rich squeeze all of the joy and the life out of it again and again." And I just, my notes, I just put in, "Amen, sister." And then that whole space sequence, and what I put in my notes about that is, like, sometimes all you need is distance, to get some perspective. And so that's when she internalizes everything that she's been experiencing through time, through these other characters, and that's what leads her to her decision to interact with the newly formed Legion. So from that, from a thematic standpoint, I thought the second issue was much better, and the story overall got a little bit better because of that for me. But I totally see your points.
And I know other people have, I've read some reviews, and people like this issue a little more. Some people didn't. I think it's this thing of, the other thing that sort of bothers me is, this is going to sound weird. Heroes are just heroes, right? Like, heroes sometimes are heroes. Some of the best heroes are heroes because they're just heroes, whether they had a costume or not, right? So now we're given that this one figure has now influenced all of DC's millennia. And I feel like we've had conversations like this where it particularly happens where female characters are given like a male, I don't know, guide or whatever. And there's a lot of criticisms like, oh, well, why can't just female characters be their own whatever? And we're sort of getting it on the flip side of this. And I'm usually never in line with people who have these arguments, But I feel like it's this way. Like, why did Booster need anybody to tell him to go be a hero, Why does OMAC need that? Why does the Legion need that when they already did have it? Now we have like 3 people doing it, I feel like it's a layer of DC continuity that is not going to be remembered in like 5-10 years.
Yeah, I can see that too.
And it's or it's sort of like when people are like, God, they're revisiting an origin story again because they're adding a new layer. It's like, I know people mentioned that with like the Green Lantern Corps. Suddenly there's a yellow lantern. Oh, now there's a rainbow lantern. Oh, guess what? There's a white lantern. Oh, God, we keep going back and back and back, It's like sometimes origin stories are just origin stories. I like that there's a connection. I always like connections. That I love, But I just think this one is a little too ham-fisted for my tastes.
Yeah, it does seem like they're pounding a square block into a round hole to have everything fit.
Yeah.
But I will say, on the flip side, Peter, I wouldn't mind like if they did a miniseries or something to fill in some of the stuff that Rose and Thorn have encountered through her travels. So just because I want to see more of the stuff that we're not seeing that has informed her journey, I guess.
I almost had the notion, I didn't write in my notes, but I might as well bring it up. I almost had the notion of, what if this 2-part Millennium story was in the actual Legion series as like flashbacks or backup tales? Would we have appreciated it more? Would it have felt a little more connected? It's easy to say in hindsight, but
oh sure, but I would agree with that. Yeah, I probably would have liked it a little bit better.
Yeah.
So yeah, because otherwise, so if they presented it that way, then it might seem more organic in the way that the historical aspects of Rose and Thorn's journey connected to what's going on in the Legion at that time. So yeah,
right.
Yeah, I feel like we're complaining a little bit about the fact that they're and the way that they're giving us the Legion, but they're giving us the Legion, so I'm happy about that.
I want it to be my Legion, Eric. Wah 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 wah. I will say though, if your listeners aren't reading Superman, get Superman 14, 15, and 16, because if you were expecting more Legion in this 2-parter, you got a lot of Legion in that story.
Yeah, wasn't that interesting that they did it that way? So this 2-issue thing was supposed to build up to the Legion, and then the next month we get the new Legion book, but yet we've already been spoiled with not only the promotional stuff, but then their appearances in those Superman issues. We get to see the characters and some of their personalities and their interactions with Superman and Superboy, and so we've already gotten a pretty good taste of the Legion, at least from a character standpoint, which we don't get hardly at all. I mean, to the point of almost non-existence in this Millennium series.
Right. Yeah, I liked those 3 issues. I felt more of a prologue than this did, and
oh yeah,
they were funny. They had a lot of camaraderie. They were the Legion, Just they weren't new designs, but they were the Legion in many cases, and same idea, questioning Brainy, like they're going back in time, as you said, to the Unity Day. Oops, but they might have been 4 minutes too early or whatever. That was funny. The Trinity got to speak. Saturn Girl, Lightning Lad, Cosmic Boy. They're right there front and center. Timberwolf was, had some humor to it. Everybody's a gaga over being there in the 21st century. So, it's Legion. It's almost to the point, and I know I keep saying this, but there's no way this could turn out this way. But it's almost too perfect the way they're there. Like I feel like there's going to be another shoe that's going to drop. But we've already had covers to like the first 3 issues of Legion. I'm assuming these are the characters we're going to stick with. I can't see how they're going to change beyond this if they do, or if they're going to pull a trick, an M. Night Shyamalan little twist. I don't know. But I guess we'll have to just wait and see. Yeah. All right.
I'm curious.
Oh, good.
I'm sorry. I'm curious how they're going to trade this 2-issue thing. Are they going to put it together with the Superman stuff, or are they going to put it with the eventual Legion trade that we get?
It's like Road to Legion.
Yeah. See, that's what I was thinking. So you would put those Superman issues together with this, but there's so much more going on in those Superman issues than just the appearance of the Legion. So it's
right.
I don't know. It's a weird thing. And maybe they won't trade it. I mean, that would be a different thing that that they would do, or not do in this case. But I
think I need to shed some of that Millennium stuff so that I go into the Legion book cold.
Well, considering that my books come only twice a month, even though the first Legion issue comes out, what'd you say?
A couple days, November 6th.
Just a couple days from now. I won't be able to read it for another 2 weeks. So I might get that perspective.
All right. Don't spoil yourself online. Don't try to follow conversations or anything.
It's like when you mentioned the covers for the books. I have no idea what you're talking about because I've not been paying attention to any of that.
Okay. All right, listeners. Let us know what you thought of either this issue or the Millennium stuff or future issues or even about Legion of Superheroes #1, but just be gentle about spoilers just in case we haven't read it. You can reach me, Peter, at thedailyrios.com.
And me at longboxreview@gmail.com.
I think we can wrap this episode up. It's a nice chunky episode for anybody who likes long episodes.
That's right.
All right, Eric. We'll talk again soon.
Yes, we will. Looking forward to it.
Great. And as always, long live the Legion Project Podcast. Don't let us down, Bendis. See ya.
Bye-bye.